It's really hard when your pastor leaves, right? If you're a churchgoer, chances are you've experienced your fair share of pastors leaving your church and heading to a new one. Now, before I continue, I know there are a lot of different Christian faith traditions out there that do things very differently from what I'm about to describe. But what I want to do is talk to you about how things work based on my experience in church leadership. There are a few different ways that people in churches see pastoral moves. The first is the career view. Some members of congregations have the view that when a pastor leaves a church, it's because the pastor wants to move up the corporate ladder, so to speak, and have a much bigger church. The second is the recycling view. Some believe that pastors have just so many sermons and just so many ideas up their sleeve that when they run out of those things, pastors have to leave and go to a new church so they can recycle all of those old ideas. The third way some see pastoral moves is the approval view, that pastors move on when their approval rating falls low enough that they must move on, aka they made people mad. Here's the thing, all of these are incomplete because they take God out of the picture. They take outward signs as the reason and don't give God any influence in the matter. Look, I want to show you why I think God moves pastors and show the cynical people out there a new way to see their cynical views. So why does God move pastors? Now, while we don't get a question and answer style reason in Scripture, I do think our clearest picture of why comes from Acts 16. In this chapter, Paul is embarking on what is commonly called his second missionary journey, or his second round of church planting in the area around the Mediterranean Sea. Paul's plan was to stick to modern-day Turkey, but God kept closing door after closing door through circumstance, so they pivoted to the seaport town of Troas. That's where we pick up in verse 9. That night, Paul had a vision. A man from Macedonia in northern Greece was standing there pleading with him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." So we decided to leave for Macedonia at once, concluding that God was calling us to preach the good news there. This chapter chronicles how once they landed in Philippi, the city of which the letter to the Philippians was written, they shared the good news of Jesus to a group of women. And one of the women, a business owner who was traveling through Philippi named Lydia, believed the gospel and became the first European to follow Jesus. Now, do all cities and all people need the good news? Yes. But God told Paul not to go to some areas of modern Turkey like Phrygia and Galatia and instead go to Philippi just so that his path would cross Lydia's path at the right moment. Though all places need the good news and good churches and good pastors, there was something strategic about Lydia's conversion, and God wanted to make sure that Paul shared the gospel with her. That's the word I want you to see, strategic. Strategic means relating to the identification of long-term or overall aims and interests and the means of achieving them. God is a strategic God. His desire is for people to know Him, to love Him, and to have salvation through Him. So He isn't haphazard in His goal. He is strategic. Like God was strategic in His move of Paul from Asia, where he had preached the gospel before, to Europe, where the gospel had never been before, God is strategic in His moving of pastors. Now, do we always know what God's strategy is? No. Do we always know the greatness of God's strategy? No. But we do know that God's thoughts are much higher than our thoughts. So, what are some of the strategic reasons why God may move pastors around? Again, we don't have this spelled out in Scripture for us, but here are some of the things that I've noticed in my life. First, I believe that God gives the gift of leadership to some pastors in higher quantities than others. To those that have that gifting, if they develop it, God will often strategically move them to a place where they can better take advantage of it. That is why those with a cynical view can see it as a career move to a bigger church. No, it's simply God moving assets around to optimize His churches. Second, I've noticed that some pastors are just better at certain aspects in the life of a church than others. Like God seems to move some pastors as that church enters into a season of construction. I've also noticed that He moves others as a church needs a renewed focus on evangelism or discipleship or worship. I even know a guy that seems to be moved from church to church before a natural disaster strikes the area. That guy is just really good at ministering to communities in that situation. I mean, honestly, insurance premiums should probably go up when he moves to town though. Now, those with a cynical view can see this as a recycling move, doing the same thing at every church. No, it's simply God moving assets around where they are strategically needed most. Third, and I bet at this point you know exactly where I'm going with this one, I've noticed that God moves pastors around when their effectiveness at one particular church is over. The nature of man is this: We all make blunders and we can't always get along. Now, though this one is negative, God will remove pastors from situations where their usefulness at a particular church is over due to conflict. Sometimes this is the pastor's fault. Sometimes it's members' fault. Usually it's the fault of both sides. No matter who's to blame, God often moves the pastor to a new place where he can be effective once again. Other than these three things, I do think there are at least a few more reasons that God moves pastors. The fourth one is this: sometimes a particular pastor is simply uniquely situated to bring someone to Christ. Like Paul was to Lydia, I believe that God has pastors in specific places just so they can intersect with certain people at the right time to deliver the gospel in just the right way to that person. Maybe it's similar hobbies, maybe it's compatible styles, maybe it's a million other things. God knows, and God is strategic about who is where. Fifth, I think that God moves pastors around to get training and experience to those pastors so they can do something later. Personally, I have picked up invaluable training and experience at every place I have served that God to this day uses on a weekly basis. There are probably tons of other reasons that God moves pastors around. If you know of a reason that I forgot, please let me know in the comments below. And also let me know if you can validate any of the 5 that we covered in any experience that you've had in the past. The bottom line is this: God is strategic. He's doing things that we can't see for reasons we can't comprehend. It may be for one of the reasons I listed. It's probably for multiple reasons that I listed. It's probably for reasons I don't even know. Only God knows. Before we pivot to some practical application, I want to point one thing out. Though we're all very familiar with pastors being moved from church to church, I do think there is a trend in pastors staying longer and longer at their churches. Now, I think there is a strategic reason behind it. Now, there's a buzzword that we hear a lot in our culture: authentic. Now, though I generally roll my eyes when I hear buzzwords tossed around, there is always something behind them that's worth noting. I think that our culture is so tired of fake news, manufactured personalities, and multiple truths that we just want to experience something that's real. Add on top of that scandals of pastors not living up to their calling, and people want to know that their pastor isn't fake, that he lives what he teaches, and that he loves Jesus. That's why I think pastors are staying in one place for longer, that God knows all of this, and he's giving people what they need right now. They need stability, a familiar face, and someone to walk beside them through life. Now, where there used to be just innate, natural trust in clergy, now that trust must be earned the hard way. And the only way that it's earned is over time. So what does that mean for you? Well, if you're a member of a church, trust that God knows what he's doing when he moves the pastor you love so much. That won't make it any less tearful, but that will give you peace knowing that not only is God moving your pastor for the other church's benefit, he's also moving someone to your church for just a time as this. When one chapter closes, another one opens. So look for the good and look for God to work. If you're a pastor, trust that God knows what he's doing as well. As painful as it is to leave, God knows what he's doing. God isn't giving you a pink slip. He's giving you a strategic transfer order to the place that you're needed most. But with that said, I'd expect you to move less and less over the next few decades as people need stability in a world that's constantly changing. I hope you were encouraged by this video. If you were, would you please consider sharing it and be sure to subscribe so that you can catch the next one when it drops on Thursday. We'll see you next time. Grace and peace.